The Bears offense is going to look brand new with number 1 overall quarterback Caleb Williams under center, and he has all the weapons in the world to be a great fantasy asset right out of the gate. We dig into the 2024 fantasy outlook for the entire Chicago Bears offense on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. Ready to talk about the Chicago Bears, as we know, the team that will be featured on Hard Knocks. So we'll do some knocking around of their fantasy value on today's show.
Woot woot. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Yeah, this is perfect timing. So we were planning to discuss the Chicago Bears anyways, right? We're going through our 32 teams. Each team gets their own episode going through all of their fantasy assets and talking through them. And we're in the NFC North this week. On to the Chicago Bears. Perfect timing because, like you just mentioned, they got named as the Hard Knocks team. So we're going to get to see really in great detail what this team is going to look like once we get into August and that show starts. But this, I mean, it's really hard to say what the Chicago Bears is going to look like this year, right? Like, you can look at last year's stats, but so much has changed. They changed out their quarterback, trading away Justin Fields, drafting Caleb Williams, number 1 overall. They added Keenan Allen. They added Rome Odunze at the number 9th overall pick in the draft, a guy that we're all very excited about at wide receiver. They switched out their running backs with now adding DeAndre Swift there to be the starter. So a lot has changed. Let's start with the guy who is going to be the biggest difference maker, right? Like, he is going to run this whole thing. It's Caleb Williams, rookie quarterback. Right now, quarterback 15 and ADP, but every day that is rising. And actually, so I wrote this at quarterback 15 a couple days ago. He's already moved up to quarterback 14. Do you think, Vinny, that his price will just continue to rise during the offseason? And do you think that's fair for him?
Yeah, I think it's very fair. When you look at this offense, and don't forget, I mean, we talk a lot about Dave Canales, but Shane Waldron also a big part of what we've seen with Geno Smith and his development here. He's a very good quarterbacks coach, and he came from the Rams. So there's going to be a better influence on Caleb Williams than we would have got from Luke Getsy. So that's great. I think you look at that start here, and he couldn't have asked for a better kind of offensive mindset here. And really the weapons, you look at them, they're hard to ignore. When you have DJ Moore, I mean, Justin Fields ran to really boost his fantasy value. Caleb Williams will run to supplement his fantasy value. I think he can pass his way to big numbers here as well. He's got a strong downfield arm. It's pretty accurate. I know he's been up and down so far in OTAs and minicamp, but that's a rookie quarterback for you. But the talent is off the charts. He's very comfortable in this offense already. They knew they were going to take him even before they went to scout him on the pro day. Keenan Allen kind of knows him from Los Angeles, so they have a little bit of built-in chemistry there. So you add Allen, you add Odunze, you add Gerald Everett. Don't forget, now you have 2 tight ends with him and Cole Kmet. DeAndre Swift, a very good receiving back. And this offensive line should be a little bit better as well. And the scheme is going to be better. So everything has improved around Caleb Williams to say that this is a good situation for most quarterbacks to be successful here. And I really like it here. So I think he has another strong rookie season to follow up what we got from CJ Stroud. And I think it's fair. I think QB 14 may be a little bit conservative as we go, but I see him doing plenty of passing, enough rushing, where that's going to add up to the numbers that we're looking for.
I will say he will have to have an outlier year to have a good fantasy season as a rookie, right? Like, looking at all time, right? So I'm going through all of NFL history here, right? Now, when you're looking at fantasy quarterbacks nowadays, you need them to at least hit 18 fantasy points per game in 4-point pass touchdown leagues, right? To be happy with them throughout the year, it has to be that 18 point per game if you're drafting them, right? And to be happy with them all year long. But there's only been 5 rookie quarterbacks all time to score at least 18 points per game as a starter. Minimum 8 starts I did for them. That's Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, RG3, Josh Allen, and CJ Stroud. Only 3 of them hit the 20 or more mark, or actually even 19 or more mark. That was Newton, Herbert, and RG3. So though out of those 5, 3 of them were very, very heavy runners, right? In RG3, Allen, and Newton. And then you had Herbert and Stroud. So that's what Caleb Williams is going to have to do, because he's not going to run as much as Allen or RG3 or Newton. He'll have mobility. He'll get a couple hundred, maybe 300 rushing yards, but it's not going to be like those guys. So he's going to have the year of Herbert or Stroud. Now, that's a huge outlier year. Could he do it with these weapons? Yes. But you're taking him knowing he has to be a massive, massive outlier.
Well, is he an outlier? Because everyone you mentioned there was after 2011. So that's a pretty good percentage. When you go back 13 years, I would say keep in mind a lot of these rookie quarterbacks, A, don't see the field, or B, are total busts. Where we get a Zach Wilson or a Kenny Pickett, just total useless rookie quarterbacks, right? So there's a lot of those. But I think 2 things I will point out. The outlier part is the fact that running, as you mentioned, are they athletic enough to put up some numbers that way? Or are they mature enough, the way that we saw with Stroud and Herbert, to hang in the pocket, deliver downfield? Now, I think with Caleb Williams, I think he has that formula to be an anomaly here. And maybe it's just about the talent that we're looking for. And things can happen, right? We thought Anthony Richardson was headed to be a very good top 12 QB, but he got hurt. So that was it. So that only made Stroud the guy there. So very interesting that the recency has really helped these rookie quarterbacks kind of perform better. So again, I would say you probably have a hit rate now of probably 40 to 50% on these rookie quarterbacks coming through in fantasy based on how many they've been there. And based on how many
I think that number is way too. I think no. Like, think about how many.
You write off a lot of them, right? They're just, some of them are just like, no, like Michael Penix Jr. is already kind of not in the mix, right, for this year. So
what I was going to say is that there's been over 20 guys even drafted in the first round over the last, since 2010. And I still only named 5 that even hit 18 fantasy points per game. Just think of all that. Bryce Young, first overall pick, did nothing. Joe Burrow didn't hit that metric. He was like in the 17s. That's not going to be good enough. Just a few years ago, Baker Mayfield, first overall pick, he hit 17. Yeah,
I can see that. Yeah,
he broke the quarterback rookie record and still wasn't that good for fantasy, right? So it's just really hard for these guys. And again, like looking at his rushing, so last year at USC, 142 rushing yards. The year before that, 384. The year before that, 442. I think he probably his rushing is somewhere around like the Jordan Love, where Jordan Love last year had 244. Like they're both mobile enough, right? They can get around. They will scramble when they need to, but that's not going to be like their first look at all. I think Mahomes last year at 389, that's probably would be like Caleb Williams' top ceiling for rushing. So I don't think the rushing is going to make that big of a difference. He is going to have to get it done with his arm.
Yeah, I think I just look at individually. That's how we have to kind of look at these quarterbacks. Maybe to say the quarterback talent that comes to the league for these top guys is pretty high. So then you evaluate that individual to say, okay, he's got the skill set. Now does he have the support system? If we can add those things together, I think Caleb Williams would qualify for what we're thinking here to be productive as a rookie. And there's some rookies where, I mean, I probably wasn't hot on Zach Wilson to start with. So there was no buzz at all about him going to the Jets. We didn't think he was going to be good at fantasy. But I think given the history of those guys and given the modern nature of these offenses and everything, I think the atmosphere is just too good for Caleb Williams. And a lot of those guys also had the right atmosphere, right? Coaches that tailored to their skill set, whether it was running. We saw that with Mike Shanahan and RG3. They really looked at Newton and Allen and say, okay, run wild, do your thing. And then I think the other cases were just good coaching with Herbert and Stroud. So I think when you add all that up, there's all those elements to say that Williams can benefit from all that. So I'm really excited to see what he can do. And I think you're going to probably see the hype build. Now, you have to be careful here because you don't want it to go up to like QB 9, 10, and then you're starting to pay a pretty high premium to get it.
Yeah, it definitely has to stay at this to even consider him for me. Now, there are 4 quarterbacks going within a 10-pick range here. It's Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa, Caleb Williams, and Justin Herbert. I do think that's a fair range for him. Would Caleb Williams be your choice among? Oh, actually, Trevor Lawrence is also going in that group. With those 5 I named, Goff, Tua, Caleb Williams, Herbert, and Lawrence, would Williams be your choice there?
Oh boy. It's tough because a lot of these guys you mentioned are not going to give you a lot of rushing. I actually think Herbert, I like his bounce back chances here in this situation with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. So I would say I would still take Herbert over Williams, but everyone else, I mean, there's question marks with all of them. There's questions on how many numbers they can put up, the consistency. They're not really runners, right? So that doesn't really give you too much either. So Caleb Williams can maybe separate a little bit from those guys with his rushing numbers.
Coming up on today's show, we're going to get into the Chicago Bears wide receivers because they might have the best wide receiver core in this league with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. We'll hop into and dig into everything we think they'll be next year for fantasy in 2024.
Yeah, it should be fun, and 2 newcomers to break down, and we'll see how that affects DJ Moore. Probably not the best for him, so we'll have that coming right at you after this word from one of our fine sponsors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships, whether it's reality or fantasy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered with more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you know you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home those huge wins every day. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S.-based customers. All right, Michelle, let's dive into those Bears wide receivers. Now, my initial thought here, and let's see if you agree with me, this is probably not the best development for DJ Moore to match his very high scoring from last year, wide receiver 10 in points per game.
Yeah, and honestly, with Justin Fields, like he was even better than that. It was the games with Tyson or whatever his name is, Bagent. Ty Bagent. Is that his name? Ty? Am I getting this right? Okay. Those were just pitiful games. But when you look at his target share, he had 28.5% of the Bears' targets last year. The next closest wide receiver was Darnell Mooney at 12.8, right? Like he had no competition for targets. They got Cole Kmet the ball because there was nobody else there, right? Cole Kmet was at 19%. We definitely expect that to go down this year. In games that DJ Moore had at least 9 targets, he averaged 21.5 points per game in half PPR. In games he had fewer than 9 targets, he averaged 7.4 fantasy points per game. So half the season, that's more than half the season of games he played, he averaged 7.4 points per game. We obviously expect him to lose out on that volume with these guys entering this team. But do you think then maybe his efficiency would increase then? But then you look at his efficiency, it was still pretty good. 14.2 yards per reception, 71 completion percentage. I don't really see room for him here.
Yeah, I think he probably drops down. We just have to accept it. He's going to drop down to a solid wide receiver 2, and maybe more in the 20s or whatever where he scores. But that's just the case. I mean, Justin Fields was basically one target passer for the most part. He had a little bit of Cole Kmet, but they also didn't have anybody else. So this was it. I mean, Darnell Mooney was hurt and on the shelf. So really no other options than throw to DJ Moore. And keep in mind, DJ Moore had some massive games. He had that one game against the Commanders on a Thursday night that was just insane. And he tends to have those big games and can disappear in some other ones. And you mentioned it there. If he didn't get the target volume, he didn't come through here. So, and you can't expect the target volume with Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze there. So I think you look at it, his ADP, I think is a little bit too high for me, even there, 30 overall, wide receiver 18. I don't think you can just drop 8 spots. And I think last year was a spike. So I think maybe his real value was maybe wide receiver 15. So now I'm looking at him at wide receiver 20 to 24. I think that's where I'm looking at him now. Just because, again, I think Odunze and Williams will have good chemistry. Allen and Williams will have good chemistry.
Yeah, discussing Keenan Allen and DJ Moore kind of in the same breath here. Like, who do we think will be the wide receiver one in targets? Because, Allen has always dominated targets with the Chargers. Last year in the weeks he played, weeks 1 through 14, he missed the last 4 games of the season. But through weeks 1 through 14, he had a 32% team target share, which is absurdly high for anybody. Then next closest was Austin Eckler at 11.5. The next closest wide receiver was Quentin Johnson at 10%. So obviously, Keenan Allen has been good for fantasy due to this volume, right? He was wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game last year. Like, crazy. But again, to compare the difference of games he got targets in a little bit fewer. So 10 plus targets. He did that in 8 games last year, averaged 22 fantasy points per game. With games with less than 10 targets, there was 5 of them. He averaged 9.9 fantasy points per game. But let me tell you, in 4 of those 5 games, he still had 9 targets. So it's not even like he disappeared in those games. He still had 9 targets in 4 of those 5 games. And still in those games, he averaged 9.9 fantasy points per game. He has always been a volume-based fantasy guy. So, like, who do you think here between Allen and Moore can either of them get 130 to 150 targets when they're both together?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say Keenan Allen is not going to dominate the targets because he gets open all the time. He's the future Hall of Famer, I think, with his numbers that he's put up. With this, well, yeah, I think he has. I mean, unfortunately, he's been hurt a few times, and that's kind of maybe that would be the one thing that would hurt him, not only with that HOF case, but also in fantasy, right? That would be the only concern. The age is one thing, but I don't think it hurts him as much because he's not a speed-based receiver. He's a guy who's technical route runner, is going to get open with his hands. So it's not going to affect him as much, and we've seen it with some guys that can still get it done when they're a little bit older because that's not their game. So Keenan Allen may have slowed down a little bit, so it really comes down to his health if he doesn't end up as the top target guy on this team. I think Allen and Williams have some really good budding things happening together. I mean, I don't think it was fake that they went out and got Allen because there was some workout stuff on the side, right, that was happening on the fields of LA. So when you look at that, I think he's going to dominate the targets. Now, I think if you're looking at like the touchdowns and big plays, I could see DJ Moore with his average yards per catch and even scores lead this team, right? But in terms of the volume and catches, if someone's going to get 100 balls on this team, even like 90 balls on this team, I would say it's Keenan Allen. And that's how you have to look at it. Now, right now, wide receiver 26 for him, wide receiver 18 for Moore. I would kind of bump those up for Allen and kind of meet in the middle with Moore.
Yeah, it's hard too, right? Because neither of these guys have been huge touchdown scorers in their career. We saw Moore have his career high at 8, but never had more than 6 before then, 8 last year. I think Keenan Allen had a couple years with 8, 9 with Herbert, but we've never known him as these huge touchdown scorers. And we know rookie quarterbacks, they don't typically throw a lot of touchdowns, right? Only 4 rookie quarterbacks have ever thrown at least 25 touchdowns. Even Stroud last year in his great year, he threw 23 passing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Since at least 2010, no player has hit 10 plus receiving touchdowns with a rookie quarterback. And the only wide receivers to hit 8 were Des Bryant with Dak Prescott in 2016, and then Keenan Allen himself with Justin Herbert in 2020. Nico Collins and Tank Dell each had 7 last year with Stroud. But to be fair, Tank Dell did have 7 in 10 games. So he could have had those double-digit touchdowns. Who knows? But we just haven't seen it. So again, these are going to have to be outlier players to put up production. Both of them are a little pricey for me, especially looking at Keenan Allen's range. I know DJ Moore is going earlier, but Keenan Allen's going right around Zay Flowers and Amari Cooper and T. Higgins and George Pickens and Tank Dell. I would rather all of those guys because maybe it's just the exciting aspect of it, but I like their situations better. Adding in now also Rome Odunze, the number 9th overall pick. Is there any room for him to be a top, like a top 24, top 30 wide receiver this year?
I think I could see him being a wide receiver 3. The Bears have to give us enough volume to make that happen, to make all these three guys viable in fantasy. I think really what you're looking at are probably two outcomes. He plays as a rookie and he works as a number 3 in their offense. And keep in mind, Waldron did use a lot of 12 as well. So you could have 2 tight ends and maybe not always having these 3 wide receivers out. And that could curb the targets here for Odunze. But I think he either finishes as a nice wide receiver 4 that you can play in some matchups. Depending on where they align all these guys, you would think Keenan Allen's a slot. These other 2 guys are outside. So you could play maybe the cornerback matchups and have some blow-up games, right? And maybe flash a few. So he's either wide receiver 4 in that sense, or one of these guys gets hurt, and then things are changing here for Odunze, because then he's going to be right up there with that player and target a lot. I think he actually has more upside if Moore's out, because he kind of can interchange with him a little bit easier than Al in the slot. So if Moore gets hurt, then you're looking at Odunze in the top 25, probably. I mean, it's depending on how long Moore misses time, but that average scoring is going to really go up. So I'm excited to see what he can do. I think everything says we need one of these guys to break down. I think the likelihood, if one of these guys misses major time, it's going to be Allen based on the history and age. So just be prepared that he's going to have some upside. You just might have to sit and wait on the bench a little bit with him.
Now, let me ask you to finish up this wide receiver segment here. Would you rather draft DJ Moore at wide receiver 18th, 30th overall prospect off the board, Keenan Allen at 48th overall, wide receiver 26, or Rome Odunze at 86 overall, wide receiver 42 off the board? If you had to pick one of them at their cost, which one are you going with?
Yeah, assuming all 3 are healthy, I think I have to go with Allen, just because I know I'm going to get the value later, and he might drop. As you mentioned, a lot of those guys are buzzy, bigger names. So a lot of people might be thinking the way you are, and then I can get his value a little bit lower, right? But I just don't think it's going to be that low in relation to what DJ Moore is. I think DJ Moore may be a little bit pricey for what he can do in this particular offense. Well, Keenan Allen's, we keep discounting this guy, and he seems to come through. So my only concern would be the injury. But then if I was going to go that way, I would flip and go for the upside of Odunze later.
I would go with Odunze. No, and in that, knowing I'm going to have to hold on to him for a while before I'm going to actually see anything from him. But I'll go with Odunze and take that chance. I don't really have any desire to roster Moore or Allen, and they're going too high for me. So if I went with one of them, it would be Odunze. We're going to get into one of your favorite running backs, Vinny, in our final segment to close out the Chicago Bears. DeAndre Swift, he has a new team. Can he finally be that stud that gets the workload? We will dig into that. And then also hit on Cole Kmet. Is he worthless for fantasy now? I think so. We'll talk about that to finish up the show. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinion, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Last year, DeAndre Swift goes to the Eagles, and it seemed like he was having a really good season overall. If you watched him, he looked good, but it was actually his worst fantasy season yet of his career. RB24 in fantasy points per game last year. He was RB20 in 2022, RB13 in 2021, and RB18 in 2020. Those first 3 years were with the Lions. Now, do you like Swift more in this Bears offense instead of being in the Eagles offense?
Yeah, we thought it was going to be the year of DeAndre Swift, especially when he went off in that game against the Vikings. Okay, we said, all right, he's wearing number 0. He's back in his hometown of Philly. He's had a big day. And I think we kind of rode that in our head, right? Okay, it kind of carried over to multiple weeks. But then when we take a deep dive into his production, it wasn't that good. So DeAndre Swift is tired. He heard about Taylor Swift taking over the NFL. He's now the number 2 Swift in the league. But now the good news is he's the number 1 running back in Chicago. And I think this is a better opportunity. The Eagles, they don't know they knew what they're doing exactly with their backfield. That's why they said, okay, we didn't like what we're doing. Let's go get Saquon Barkley, shore up all this, and get one back that we can trust for all the downs. Now, Swift has never been necessarily the guy that you're going to pound between the tackles. That doesn't mean he can't do it. I mean, he's a Georgia back. A lot of these guys in that era that we've seen come out, like Nick Chubb and all that, have been capable of doing that. I mean, it's not like they shied away from power running when he was there, but it really depends on what they think about Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert. And I don't think they are crazy about them or they wouldn't make this move. And I think there's a lot of upside here for Swift because what do you have? You have rookie quarterback, a lot of checkdowns. I think the targets are really going to help him be productive here. And RB21 I think it's pretty low for him because again, RB24, that wasn't a year where he had one big game and really didn't do all that much. So this year, I think he'll have consistent touches. The Eagles, keep in mind, with Jalen Hurts, weren't a big check down passing team. Jalen Hurts kind of steals the touchdowns and the short yardage opportunities, right, when him taking off versus checking down. So everything lines up really well here for DeAndre Swift. And this is maybe why I'm a little bit concerned about sustaining 3 wide receivers because Swift is such a good receiver. And I think he's going to cut into the wide receivers. He's going to cut into the tight ends. I'm really excited what he can do in this offense. And maybe he'll have a career high in touchdowns too.
So I have the opposite worry. I think with all these wide receivers here and even Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett, like typically running backs who see a high target share, like they're needed on their team, right? Like no team wants to run their offense through a running back. That's just not successful. We've seen it now with Herbert and Alvin Kamara, right? When their team has to pass to them too much, their offense just stinks. They do. There's just, what do you get? If you get 10 yards per reception for a running back, that's amazing for them. Like that's absurd. That's such a high ceiling for them. And then that would be such a bad yards per reception for wide receivers. You just get more bang out of your buck by using your wide receivers in an offense. So I don't think it would be smart of the Bears to go in with these 3 great wide receivers and be like, you know what? We're going to get the ball to DeAndre Swift. So I don't actually see him having a very high target share. And it'll come down to his touchdowns. We'll see how much the Bears can score on the ground with a rookie quarterback and with all those weapons, and he's never really been a big touchdown scorer either. So I'm lower on Swift than you are. I think you are much higher, but that's fair. Now looking at like guys going around him, you have Montgomery going a couple spots after him, Zamir White, James Conner. I do think his price is pretty fair. I just don't know if I'll be taking him.
Yeah, I like him actually over all those guys because I think his role is going to be pretty dedicated. And keep in mind, there's a couple of things to think about with their backs from last year. Roschon Johnson was known to be a good pass protector as a rookie. So that was something. Herbert was supposed to be the guy who was going to change the pace from Donta Foreman, but I don't think they trust him too much as a receiver. And I think that kind of prompted them to go get Swift. I think he can handle both of those roles and be rather busy. So, yeah, the target share is going to be interesting for sure. But there could be a lot of targets to go around too, right? This offense should be a lot more productive in the passing game that we've seen in the past. And keep in mind, the Bears are also a very good run blocking offensive line. So that's going to help Swift. I mean, that's one thing they had were going last year, and I guess we didn't see it as much because Justin Fields was stealing a lot of the rushing yards. So there's going to be some opportunities there for Swift. So again, I'm not saying go nuts and draft him. I just think he's a little bit undervalued here, given he has a path to a lot of key touches here on this team.
Now, Cole Kmet, he finished as a tight end 8 in points per game last year. I mean, being the tight end 8 doesn't mean all too much. He averaged 8.5 points per game last season, half PPR. Like, that's still gross. But do you think there's any chance for him to be back into that top 10 area for tight ends that you just take late and you say, you know, the ceiling's not too high, but maybe he's safe, or do the additions of Allen and Odunze and Everett just completely destroy his fantasy value?
Well, I did say Shane Waldron like 12 personnel. He sometimes used 13 personnel with the tight ends. But did he like throwing to the tight ends? No, not really. They didn't really get the ball that much. I mean, Noah Fant. I mean, that's a tight end he leaves behind in that Seattle offense. So do you really trust these two now? Again, it's a committee. Gerald Everett is just not a pushover, right? He's a guy that had some really good value here, and he's been in the committee. And keep that in mind, Gerald Everett goes back to the Rams with Waldron as well. So he was in the committee with Tyler Higbee. So maybe they're trying to recreate that. They had Noah Fant and they had Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson and all these guys that they would trot out. So I think Cole Kmet is going to have a way diminished role. They don't need him with these 3 receivers and Swift. I think Kmet will get a share of touchdowns, get some red zone looks, a few underneath targets, but he's got to share with Everett there, that capacity. So this is a player I do not want on my team. Like you said, he wasn't even exciting last year. He finished tight end 8 because there was just a lot of options. This year, there should be a lot of options with healthy guys there that are going to produce. We talked about Mark Andrews. We'll see Brock Bowers. Andrews being healthy, Bowers in the mix. You got so many guys that have higher upside than Cole Kmet at this position. So absolutely, I have zero interest in Cole Kmet. I don't care. I don't even want to look at him at tight end 15. I do not want to touch Cole Kmet anywhere on my rosters in 2024.
I completely agree with you. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for listening to Locked On Fantasy Football. Thank you for us being your first listen every day. We'll be back on Monday talking about the Minnesota Vikings. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.